What's up, everybody? Just a quick note before the podcast proper. There are two things I wanted to say. The first of which is this is a spoiler podcast. I should have stated this before I explained the entire plot of the host, but you're going to get a lot more out of this podcast if you watch the movies beforehand. Of course, you can do it however you want, but that's really how this is designed. It's after you see the film, just to hear a couple of dudes talk about it, which is hopefully interesting. We will find out. The second one is that we are aware of the audio issues. My treble is out of control. Jeff is sort of muted, and Alex completely dominates the bass. So we're getting on top of audio editing and getting better microphones. So the first few episodes will be a little bit rough audio wise, but just know that we are working on it. And with that, I hope you enjoy the podcast. What's up, everybody? This is the first episode of the One More Take podcast. I'm Jesse, and with me is Jeff and Alex. And for this first episode, we are kind of doing something different to us, which is an interesting way to start a podcast. We're going to be talking about two films from director Bong Joon-ho, The Host from 2006 and Parasite. Now, Jeff and Alex have both seen these films before. I have not, so we'll probably have a bit of a different perspective. But yeah, you guys want to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you. And Jeff, well, happy to be here. Happy to be on this first episode of this podcast. Excited to get it started. Yeah, I'm just excited to take a look at two movies that I actually don't have that much experience with as far as Korean cinema goes. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation.
All right, and I guess I'll go, seeing as I'm last. Uh,
You are
I'm
last but
Alex,
not least, my friend.
and I have had the fortune of seeing both films before they were suggested. Glad I got to revisit both of them, especially Parasite. Um, it'll be interesting too because I do think, going off of what Jeff just said, that Korean film is definitely starting to make itself known across the sea, and it's about time we take notice. So it's good to start with these two films, I think.
Yeah, so Jeff, do you want to tell the people about The Host?
Love to. So, The Host. This was an interesting watch for me. I actually hadn't seen The Host before. I thought I had, but when I watched it, I realized the different Korean horror movie that I had seen. So that was my
Oh,
That's
mistake.
funny. That's
Yeah,
because this was your recommendation.
exactly. Like that's why I kind of was like, oh yeah, we'll go with the host, and then I realized I didn't see this. So it was an interesting first watch for me, but I have some issues with it, but we'll get into that. But yeah, the host made in 2006. At least that's the date that could find. Director Bong Joon-ho, famous for Snowpiercer, Parasite, as we know. We'll be talking about later. Starring Kang Ho Song, who also is a kind of a frequent actor with Bong Joon-ho movies. He's also in Parasite. Some quick little factoids about the host. It was prior to 2014. It was the highest grossing Korean film of all time. I thought that was pretty
oh wow.
interesting. It's incredibly popular. It's so popular that they actually have a statue of the monster from
Mm.
from the movie on the Han River. So it definitely made quite a cultural impact in Korea. It's based on a true event, surprisingly enough. At least the first scene. Uh,
Not the fish monster,
Not
right?
the fish monster, but the pouring of formaldehyde into the Han River was something that actually happened between a U.S. Army doctor, I believe it was, and his South Korean subordinate, who he was ordered to pour a massive amount of formaldehyde in Han River, leading to kind of a big legal battle between South Korea and the particular U.S. representative, and led to a lot of political strife between the citizens and the politicians of South Korea. And yeah, it's a movie that I felt it's hard to give it the title of horror movie. I've kind of put it into more of a vein of the traditional monster movie. Things that the type of genre that we haven't seen in a long time in America, which I believe is still very much popular in South Korea. It's just like the just straightforward monster movie with very little horror spin on it. Like where I can think of similarities would be like to American movies, maybe like Jaws, the older Godzilla movies, stuff where
Yeah, it's not scary.
yeah, it's not
It's not
supposed to be
scary.
scary. It's supposed to be kind of just like a fun ride, fun monster ride. But I before kind of going into the deeper aspects of it, I think Jesse, you had a little synopsis to launch us into that.
Yes. So I have a whole bevy of notes here. Let me first off say like it's weird when the grand sort of reaction to a film is positive and then you don't end up liking it. Which is different than saying it's bad. I wouldn't call this a bad movie, but I had a lot of problems with it. Um, and I'll just like go right in. So the opening is, and you talked about this, Jeff, a little bit, which provides some context that I didn't have. But it opens with two scientist men speaking like really unsubtle dialogue about pouring chemicals, formaldehyde, into a river for some reason because the bottles are dusty. Was that the? Did I miss something there?
Yeah, I kind of think it was supposed to be like inside info about the event, the actual true event. Like maybe I couldn't find any information about the actual event beyond just the overarching idea of what happened. But I think that maybe this was a little bit of the South Koreans' take on maybe the doctor in question was uh, obsessive compulsive or very controlling. That's kind of what I got from it. But that is essentially why they had to be poured out was because of the dustiness. Continue.
Okay, because dustiness. So that's the only context provided by the movie of why they're pouring formaldehyde down a sink, which will end up in a river. Fine. All right. Next scene, we're introduced to our like relentlessly schlubby main character with tremendously baggy pants, um, and his dad and his daughter, and they work at this like little riverside like snack shack sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we're straight into a monster movie 10 minutes later when this gigantic fish comes out of the river and starts like munching people.
Yeah, they do not
And
obey the wait 30 minutes and show the monster rule as we see a lot in American monster movies. They really just
Mm.
show the monster immediately. There is no
Hmm.
yeah,
downtime.
which I kind of appreciated. I was like, all right, that's the kind of movie we're going here. It's not scary, but it's fun. I was smiling at this point. Um, and so they have this action scene where the monster swallows our main character's daughter, and there's like an action scene, and he gets blood on him. And then the next scene, we're in like a shelter, right? We're introduced to the rest of the family, um, where there's like this fallout from the event, right? Everyone's in like a shelter. And this is where the tonal weirdness of the movie started because the family's like looking at the picture of the girl and all of them are rolling around on the floor in like this agony in front of her picture. And I'm like, is this serious? Is this a comedy? And it
Hmm.
was totally fucking with my brain. Um, and then every single person around them whips out cameras, like not phones but like full on cameras with flash photography, like professional video cameras, and starts filming them writhing on the ground. And it felt like tonally like The Naked Gun or something. And at this point I was like, what is this movie? So as I said, the main character got monster blood on him during this opening action scene. And from that, the movie establishes that he might have some kind of deadly virus. So the family is forced to go into quarantine. They find out through a phone call from the daughter that the daughter is still alive somewhere. And so the family subsequently escape in a van with a soundtrack of wacky clown music. And it turns out they hired some sort of service to help them escape, who also sell them guns and hazmat suits, I guess. Um, this plot element is never seen again. So after this, they fruitlessly hunt through the sewers to find the daughter. Don't find her, and then end up in like an action scene with the monster on the riverside again. And this is where the dad dies at the hands of the monster, and the story then completely forgets about him for the rest of the film. He's never mentioned. Like his specter doesn't loom over the film in any meaningful way, to me at least.
Mhm.
Um, so our main character, after this action scene, is captured by military guys, and the others, the brother and the sister, go their separate ways in this what is now a sort of splintered narrative. And the structure of the movie is now like these fragments. Feel free to interrupt me at any time, by the way.
Oh yeah, I'm kind of just taking a few notes, and then we'll kind of go back over it
Yeah,
because
for sure.
I have some contradictions to your point
I
there.
I, I love that
Yeah.
because you've seen it before. I like I said to begin with. It's weird when you find so many problems with the movie that everyone loves. But anyway, so one of the threads now is the brother character who goes to meet some random guy that I don't think was ever mentioned earlier in the film,
No.
presumably a friend of
No.
his.
Yeah, an old friend, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
from
it's
university.
the point of this is in order to give us some throwaway exposition about cell towers having a radius. Um, so it's that scene in the movie, where the character looks on a computer and figures out where the girl is. And then he's betrayed and a bunch of dudes are after him, but that's okay because the script decides in this moment that he's an escape artist, which is never set up. He mentions, like, the friend mentions, "Oh guys, he's a slippery one. He's something of an escape artist." And you're like, "What? Where did that come
It
from?"
does get
Except to have
very
him escape
it does get very Jason Bourne in that segment.
in that
There's a
scene.
he gets a very like Jason Bourne moment in that scene. I agree. Continue.
Yeah, so he runs away deftly and he jumps down off of a freeway. And the visual inference of this that I got is that he's broken one or more of his limbs. I legitimately thought he had died with the way that they shot that. And later, he wakes up somewhere else, apparently just fine. And because the final action scene of the movie is going to need more characters, a homeless guy, for no reason at all, tags along and they start making Molotov cocktails. Like this homeless character is manifested so fucking lazily for the sole purpose of pouring gasoline on the monster a few minutes later. So that's one element of the splintered narrative. So meanwhile, the sister just kind of like wanders around, I guess, while our main character is subjected to what I consider the dumbest scene in the movie, which we'll get to. But basically, this whole series of events with the brother was for the sole purpose of finding out through this quick and lazy scene where the daughter is, which is fine, I guess, but that information never even pays off. They just end up fighting the monster on shore, not in the sewers. It had already left, and also for no apparent reason except that the script told it where it had to fight our protagonists. I found no like logic of why it left at this exact moment. So throughout all this, we're cutting back every so often to the little girl down there in the sewers and a little boy who's with her. And you think, like, maybe they're trying to do something clever here, right? She uses a beer can to test if it's sleeping, uses the jackets of the corpses down there to make a rope, and tries to do something. But the monster catches her and the little boy and eats them. So I'm glad we spent all that time on that. But back to our main character. He's now in some sort of like trailer, some sort of medical trailer. And when the English speaking doctor shows up to give him a lobotomy, I am like checked out of the movie. Like, I was like, what is this nonsense?
It's definitely the worst scene in the movie is that scene, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's established by the doctor himself that there is no virus, which is the whole reason for like keeping him. But then they stick a drill into this character's head anyway, which, as far as I can tell, also served no narrative purpose, nor did it have any impact whatsoever on his motor or mental functions. So I'm thinking, like, is the joke that he's stupid? Like, I don't get it. I no longer understand what's happening or why anything matters. So he escapes the medical trailer, which happens, of course, to be just a stone's throw away from where the monster battle's about to happen, and where the military are just hanging out barbecuing and hanging out sheets to dry. And nobody stops him so that the script can have him impale the monster with a street sign in 5 minutes. My point with all of this nonsense is, like, a splintered narrative can be fine. It can be great, but not if it's like completely pointless. I don't feel like I learned anything or gained anything during all of these segments that comprise the second half of the film. It just felt like filler. And I guess the daughter died because we see our main character with the little boy at the end, but not her.
Hmm.
So, like, what's the message here? Did our characters learn anything? What was the purpose of the little girl dying or the dad dying serve? Like, what was I supposed to get from this movie? I should
Ah,
also say one more thing, and I should have said it earlier. This is a spoiler podcast. You will enjoy this much more if you watch the movies first.
Oh yes,
My
definitely.
bad. But you probably get that now.
I'll
So yes,
timestamp it.
now now tell me why I'm wrong.
Okay, so I first off, before I preface this, and so now that you've finished this, I just want to put in, like, Alex, feel free to also interject at any
Oh
time.
yeah, of course.
I think
I'm taking notes as well.
I just think I really wanted to give you the time to kind of get your idea across without interrupting. So I apologize if I didn't, if we're gonna go back and address a lot of the things that you've talked about. So yeah,
No, please
I'd like to
do.
start at the beginning. So before, I'm gonna preface this by saying that I didn't love this movie. I didn't hate it, and I didn't think it was bad, but I didn't fall in love with any of the characters or the narrative. But I think that you might have lost a few narrative threads by just not being so in tune with the characters, and kind of not care. I don't want. I hesitate to say not caring, but it's just, you know what I mean. Like, I think that because there are some a little tie-ins to the plot that you didn't quite go over, and I think we should definitely address them. So first we want to talk about um is all right. First of all, let's talk about the very first scene, the cameo by Scott Wilson, which I thought was very weird that somebody of such a renowned actor level of him would be in this. I mean, Bong Joon-ho at this point has kind of made a name for himself. He's a well-known director, but the fact that Scott Wilson decided to play this American formaldehyde dust hating doctor is not something that I would have expected, and I was actually quite pleasantly surprised because I really enjoy Scott Wilson in the roles that he has played. Um, I want to go thematically with it. First is that, there are heavy themes of US influence on South Korean politics, which I
Hmm.
believe is something that we definitely can't gloss over, is about how the US has kind of trampled over South Korea's ability to handle the situation, and thus releasing essentially a bioweapon to beat a bioweapon. But we'll get into that a little later. But I definitely want to keep that in mind. It's like the U.S. is portrayed as kind of a subsequent villain in this film, somebody who's lying and manipulating to then create and foster a sense of fear in South Korea of this virus. And I apologize if this is getting too topical. um, but like, so let's go. So the opening scene, we have Scott Wilson. I agree, it was a little bit segmented from the main plot. It was very, like, separate. It felt tonally very different. Like, I was feeling the tone of that first scene very strongly. I was like, okay, we have this idea. I thought that the subordinate, the South Korean subordinate to this doctor, was going to be the main character. And when he was just turned out to be a secondary character, or not even a tertiary character, he's just a one-off, I was like, oh, okay, that's strange. So we get into the um
It was just a it was just a very weird way to like have your monster be birthed.
Sure,
You
and
know, it's like a scientist thinks the bottles of formaldehyde are dusty. Like you
sure.
get better monster logic from like Zat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that I mean, yes, formaldehyde is not going to cause genetic mutations in the local wildlife that would then, within months, create a being such as the monster in this movie. But again, I'm jumping ahead. I wanted to get into just the initial character introductions. So we are given the main character, that's Kang Ho Song. He is the father of Huan Xiao, who is uh, the daughter, the daughter character that gets taken. Now, there are some aspects of him that are obviously like, yes, I agree, schlubby. Um, I think something you have to highlight is the fact that his hair is dyed blonde, which is a another take on Western influence. Usually, when South Korean people would dye their hair like that, it's kind of influenced from something else. Or I kind of felt like he was holding on to a part of his youth that he had lost,
which is a big part of the film,
which
I
is a big
feel.
part of the film, is this idea of lost youth and states of arrested development within someone's mental cycle, which he is
Uh-huh.
stuck in. He more relates to his daughter as a peer than as a father, and that
Yeah, I
is
thought they were brother and sister
and it
at
goes
first.
into that pretty clearly when later in the movie when they are holed up in the snack shack, and the father, he's sleeping, and the father has this huge exposition dump, probably the largest exposition dump of the movie, I would think, about how he has had his youth taken from him because he is the oldest of the three siblings, and his mother walked out on them. He had a daughter very young, and which then her mother left, which they make a point of that. They say, do you think she knows that Huang Xiao is dead? And they say, oh no, like how could she? She walked out when she was young. So there are little nuggets and sand pellets of expository and explanation dialogue, but it's not clearly stated enough to be in any way impactful or significant towards the greater narrative, which I do agree with you on that, Jesse, is if you're going to tell us something, tell it. Don't just say it in an offhanded comment and expect it to actually carry over when there's so much going on. But we do suffer from, and I don't want to bring up another movie that we're not talking about, but like The Wailing, where we have like the schlubby character that's kind of unlikable.
Mhm.
We have themes of he saving up money for his daughter's cell phone via coins, which is something a child would do, or like a teenage friend. The
Yeah,
dyed
that's a good point.
the dyed hair, the giving his daughter a beer as an underage, it's not a very fatherly thing to do, at least by our standards. It's more of something like a brother would do or a friend. Like, here, drink this beer with me. They introduce the sister character. Her name is Park Hae Il, and no, sorry, her name is Baduna. Yes,
Mhm.
Baduna. Yes, excuse me.
We don't speak Korean, by the way, people. So forgive us.
Yeah,
I think
forget.
Jeff's going to be the best at the pronunciations
Yeah,
here.
excuse me if I butcher these people's names. I'm trying my best to really highlight the actors involved. But yes, Baduna's character Park Namju. She is I want to say an Olympic archer. It didn't quite state if this was like a South Korean only event or it was an Olympic event. Judging by how rapidly she was able to come back, I assume it was more of like a South Korean archery event. But anyway, the sister is an archer, a world class professional archer, which when you see in the beginning of the movie when she fails, they call her too slow. She hesitates on her target and loses the competition and takes home the bronze medal. It's this idea of that this family has their own personal drawbacks. They all are good people who have failed in some way because of a personality flaw. You have the oldest son, Kang Ho Song's character, who is, state of arrested development, a regressed state of personality. You have Ko Song's, yes, Baduna's character, excuse me again. I'm really trying to get this. Who is hesitating and too slow. You have Park Hae Il. That is the the brother, the middle brother, and he is a university graduate, never went anywhere in life. And in South Korea, I think there's some context needed that to go to it's not something that everybody does is go to university. It's a very expensive thing to do and costs a lot for a family. So what we're doing is I'm giving a long-winded explanation of the fact that we're setting up a very mediocre family as the main characters. That this is a
Right.
monster movie that has no Arnold Schwarzenegger. It has no, smart, heroic, tough, badass as the protagonist. It has a very mediocre family who's just sad and grieving over another lost loved one. So I think that
Which is the best part of the movie is like their dynamic with each other.
agreed,
Yeah,
agreed.
I will say, going back to something that Jesse said and what you just said, Jeff, I feel like that's where that kind of hospital escape kind of breaks down, doesn't really fit in with the composite of the characters that the film is building from the get-go.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, this movie is a tonal mess.
It
And
is
I think we
definitely.
can all agree on that. I think that no matter I don't see a way that you couldn't agree on that. It is tonally very off. The score is very strange in the movie.
Yes.
It has a very interesting use of like what Jesse said, like very like circusy clown car music and scenes that it kind of takes the wind out of the sails. I would agree with the scene where they're escaping the hospital by these criminals how do they know them? And of course, I'd like to caveat all of this conversation with the fact that we don't know South Korean culture very well, if at all. I mean, I just do I try to do a little research that I can. So if you are South Korean or if there's something that you know more about this, then it probably makes more sense. But from us and our perspective, it's just we're just taking it as three Americans.
Well, see,
Yeah.
Uh,
that's an element I wanted to touch upon that I was thinking about, and we didn't record our conversation about The Wailing, which is a phenomenal South Korean horror film. But that also had like some weird tonal things going on, and we had a conversation about that where like we're very much used to our Western storytelling, and so it's like it's hard to say if there's something that's lost in translation, especially like when you have a whole cinematic canon that you're not very familiar with.
Yeah.
Um,
Whole
it's
literary
like
canon.
it's yeah, like it's very well for me to like compare this to like what I expect from movies. But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say it's a tonal mess, but it was frustrating. I didn't really know what it was trying to do a
well,
lot of the time.
and to touch on that, I really think it was frustrating because, like a lot of South Korean film that I've seen, it has great actors play their roles well, whether they're victim to poor screenplay or odd direction or whatever it may be. The actors did their jobs. Each actor is believable, carries the character that they're supposed to be playing well. I really liked all the actors of the movie. And typical standing when I see South Korean movies, the child actors tend to be the strongest.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I've seen that in The Wailing, Parasite. All the younger actors very much carry a big bulk of the movie on their shoulders. And what I mean tonal mess is it's frustrating because there are some really, really, to me, very well done and heart-wrenching scenes. The funeral scene that you so aptly thought was all over the place, which I agree, I think was a really great scene because it was so it was so heart-wrenching. Like I mean, these people were almost genuinely grieving over this lost loved one in these fits of sadness and rage and this non-unification of the family structure, which I thought was interesting. Like this family structure is very dissolved, and it's kind of clearly showing that in this scene that like these people don't respect each other. Like father works very hard to put the son through college and keep everyone fed and employs the eldest son and nobody seems to be very appreciative of him. The daughter seems to be like the highlight of the group. Sorry, excuse me, the sister, not to. I don't want to say daughter and then confuse it with the main character's daughter. So she's this Olympic athlete and they all really like her, and she says she's very respected in the family. And then you have the alcoholic, college, not dropout necessarily, but college failure. And so you have this fractured family unit, and they're writhing on the ground in agony of this lost child. And I do believe that at least from my interpretation, that the cameras were not people, that they were more media that was capitalizing on grief, which I think was supposed to be kind of the point of that scene, was that
Oh, maybe.
these media personalities are ignoring this very to grieve openly like that is a very vulnerable thing to do, and these media personalities are snapping pictures and videos of this very vulnerable type of grief. And I think Alex, you were going to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's very visceral.
Yeah.
And it's, I will say, so there's something going on here with the discussion that you guys are having with this idea of arrested development, and this idea of falling from grace. And I always wonder when I watch this movie and he's in that snack bar, right? Such juvenile things to be around all day. If we're getting down to the very materialistic, granular things, right? Like, I mean, I remember walking into 7-Eleven before it was alcohol and cigarettes, and it was candy, chips, things like that, So it seems like he moves around in this very juvenile like space already. And then of course with the bleached hair and the things like that, he's like holding on to this this image of himself from a long time ago. And I think we actually see that a lot with the brother. I think that's Park Nam Il.
Yes.
Because he was also like this political activist, right?
Yes, I want to touch on that. Yeah.
And then we see the sister as a national medalist archer type person, which, talking about Parasite later on, there's a huge connection there that I would want to talk about with sports and medals.
Yes.
But when the monster comes, it brings all of these people, it like wrenches all of these people out of this like state that they're in. Almost, it like rekindles some of this political fire in the brother. It actually forces the Park Gang-do, the main character, to be a father, and then with the sister, I mean, she tries to be an archer, right? Which I think also South Korean archery is big,
Yeah,
in the Olympics and such. So it's interesting because whenever I watch this guy's movies, I, I don't know if it's a very heavy-handed allegory, like an allegorical tale about like this is what the media does, but it's not even symbolic, right? It's not like a symbolic image of what the media does. It's like a literal image of this is what the media does when there's chaos. So I think that what you guys are talking about is true, but I always, what my point is, I always wonder is if the filmmaker is doing this on purpose to like kind of yank us into this weird space, into this weird corner, which then forces us to break down the movie in a different way. So if it's intentional, I think it's genius, right? And I think it's not a masterpiece, but I think it's a very subtle move. But I will agree with this idea that, you guys have heard the Chekhov's gun thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we are in an armory full of weapons that never fire in this entire movie.
Yes,
that's a cool way to put it.
That's a really good way to put it.
What did you think of the movie overall, Alex? Because I know you said you've watched it multiple times.
Mm-hmm. So it was like my first exposure to what I guess you would call Asian monster films, right? And I went in with it with that real heavy like expectation of, okay, we're going to see a piece of flesh here, a glimpse of an eyeball here, things like that. And I really wasn't ready for the just like in your face, start from the get-go type thing. But I enjoyed it immensely the first time, but I was a lot younger when I saw it right around when it came out. at like an old college independent movie theater. And then watching it the second time and hearing you guys talk, I do think that tonal mess is a good description so far. If we can't find a better one, it almost seems like their artistic urges or Bong Joon is like playing this kind of auteur's game where he's trying to put all of these messages in and it creates this weird like bulging mass
Yes.
almost that never really manifests into anything. So I would say I think it's very entertaining. I can't knock it for like not being an entertaining movie to watch. But thinking about that lobotomy scene, that will definitely set the movie off the rails a little bit.
Sure.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? Is like I did note some weird tonal like moments where my brain didn't know what to do with the information, but that's not really what like made me not like the movie. It was more and to your point about like I don't know, like little motifs and like pointing at things culturally or politically or whatever. That's cool too. That's great. I love it when movies just point at things. I don't know exactly what it was doing, but
Hmm.
um, mainly it was structural. My problem with it was structural, where in the second half of the movie didn't feel like things were leading to things. It just felt like scenes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree, and I think to speak on Alex's point, there is an aspect of having to kind of look at each family member in a vacuum and kind of see their character progression, but it does feel overinflated. It does feel jam-packed, but I think when you say things like, was this intentional? I think it was, because if we look at Bong Joon's filmography and we look at the things he's made, not just Parasite but Snowpiercer. I mean,
Hmm.
these. I mean, he's definitely has that type of directorial eye where he's trying to make a point,
He
and
really likes his social commentary.
he also
Yeah.
really likes
Oh
his
yeah.
characters. He's a very character-driven director. I mean, we'll talk about it in Parasite. Parasite's a very character-driven movie. There's very little actually goes on in the overworld of the movie. And in The Host, it's almost the same. Like while you do have a lot of doctors and military personnel, they're all portrayed as kind of
Morons?
unsupportive. Yeah, not very intelligent, unshaven, kind of grubby looking. Like there's this strong tone of that nobody knows what they're doing. And I kind of think that that is a point that he was trying to make, is who actually knows what they're doing. And I think that's kind of what he was trying to get across. But and not to bring it back to the beginning again, but I think we are just glossing over a few things. Like, we get this schlubby character. He eats one of the squid's legs. Again, this is a cultural thing. Like the dad says, like it having 10 legs is very important to the people eating. Like this was lost on me. I was like, okay, well, for
Yeah,
in
he eats
in
some of
my
the customers' food.
yeah, exactly. In my mind, that's where my American brain goes. Is, oh, he ate some of the customer's food. That's not okay. But
Mm.
they try to go a little more into that. So I always try to remember these things because I want to give the movie the benefit of the doubt that there's something going on that I don't understand. But we get to the scene where the monster first comes out, and you have the very brave looking United States Army dude, which at the time you don't know is an army dude. He's just an English speaking guy who is eager to help people. So, he rushes away from his girlfriend towards that trailer that was full of people. And it's actually what I thought was interesting when the monster first came out, it didn't outright kill anybody right away. It took about 3 to 4 minutes of this action scene before you actually see a drop of blood, which I thought was very interesting as far as tonal setting, because it was almost like this monster didn't have a desire to kill, and it just had a desire to cause havoc. But then, you get the scene with the trailer, they're all jammed up in there, there's like blood running down the front, and you're like, okay, here it is. Here's the monster aspect of it. But so the main character, he goes into this, jumps into the fray, which is it's an act that's very unlike him. And he helps this United States soldier out to break open the door and help the people get out, and then help him fight the monster, which eventually leads to the guy getting eaten. And there's a little callback in the end of the movie, because in the beginning of the movie they fight the monster with a signpost that was pulling out of the ground, and then in the end of the movie, Gangdo kills the monster with a signpost that he pulled out of the ground and smashed the cinder block on. So I definitely think there's like trying to do little callbacks.
Yeah, and the archery thing. She's not slow at the draw at the end, so I guess that's a little character arc for her.
Yeah, they
Little M
tried.
Night Shyamalan thing in there.
Yeah, and I think that the scene, and I know I'm jumping forward, but the scene that you mentioned in the telecom building where he becomes Jason Bourne, I think
Hmm.
that was supposed to be him like discovering his activist self, because they say in the elevator that the guy, that his college friend, was also an activist. He says something along the lines of like, "How do you find time?" Like, or like, "Far stretch from you being an activist in college." So they were
Mm.
all, and then when he's running away and he looks through the window at the guy who's hunched down, he gives him like a fight the power fist. Even though he turned him in, which was kind of
Hmm.
odd to me. Um, but the movie also telegraphs um, plot points very
Hmm.
strongly, which is not, it's to its detriment,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
like they're riding the elevator up and he goes, "Oh, what kind of job?" And talking about your salary is very common in South Korea. And so like, what he says, "Oh, what's the type of job make 60, 70K a year?" And the guy goes, "Well, I have 60, 70K in credit card debt." Which to me was like, okay, this guy's going to betray him right away, because now they've just established motive for the character to betray him. And nothing, at least in my opinion, not many things in movies are unintentional unless it's an outright bad movie with a bad director. But
Hmm.
Bong Joon is not a bad director, so he's gonna make things make sense. And prior to that, Jesse, I just want to say, like, you are right that the father is relatively forgotten, but they do try to bring him back a little bit when they right before he gets meets up with the old friend. He's in front of the dry cleaner and he sees the wanted poster, and he sees like his father and his brother's picture, and one says deceased and one says captured, and he kind of has like a emotional moment in there.
There is that. Yes,
So
I
I
forgot
I
about
think
that.
that they were trying to tie it in, but again, I think where Alex's point comes in is that at that point in the movie is already overinflated. And so things are easily forgotten and dismissed, which I think is a
Yeah,
yeah.
the interesting part to me about all these points you're making about these little things character wise the movie's doing is I can completely see your argument for it, but none of that translated for me in the movie.
I was going to ask quick question that relates to what you just said, Jesse. Thinking of this director when I'm watching The Host again, I think of Snowpiercer. I think of Parasite, and that's why I use that word auteur, right? When you watch a Tarantino film, you can think of every film he's ever made before
Hmm.
and think, okay, I'm feeling some of the same feelings right now as a film goer and as a movie watcher, as a fan. You you're like, I've felt this before, I've tasted this before. So I was wondering, do you think it's good to do that for this film, the host specifically, and for this director specifically, or not?
Thinking about him in like a Tarantino sense where it's like
Exactly.
you almost can't encapsulate him within any other kind of genre. It's almost just like a Tarantino film is not a drama, it's a Tarantino film.
Yeah,
Well,
Uh
it's interesting. Could we figure out some of the logic in this film using logic that he's used in another film? You know what I'm saying?
I don't know.
I don't know
So
if
like I've only seen Parasite and I saw Snowpiercer a long time ago, which I enjoyed, but I couldn't really point to like any trademarks in there.
Hmm.
What do you think, Jeff?
it's hard to say. I kind of see what you're saying, Alex. I think it's less. I definitely agree with what you're saying when it comes to Tarantino. Like for not to do too much of a non sequitur, but like in Sin City, where it's Robert Rodriguez, but those scenes that Tarantino directed because someone gets shot and flies 50 feet in the air. Like you're like, yep, that was Tarantino right there. Like that. I definitely see what you're saying, but I to to piggyback on what you're saying, but to shift it a little bit is I think it's more of, instead of viewing it as like this is Bong Joon's style and viewing it like that, I think it's totally fair to compare by the way, like Parasite and all that kind of stuff. I kind of think we should wait until we talk about Parasite because then
Mhm.
both of them kind of fit together. But I agree. Like I've only ever seen of his movies Snowpiercer and Parasite. Besides this one, I'm looking at his IMDb right now, and I have not seen any of these other movies of his.
I
But it
believe
do,
that's the same for me. Yeah.
but I do believe that The Host was his first major motion picture in which he was also the co-writer on and the director, and he was also the screenplay and the director of Parasite and
I mean,
Snowpiercer. So he's very much one of those all-in-one directors. He has very
Yeah,
much the high level of creative control. So that is why I think it's fair to talk about it in that context.
definitely.
but I don't know. Like stylistically, like I would not, if I didn't know, I would not have thought that this was from the same director as Snowpiercer, or definitely not Parasite.
Oh, really?
See,
Yeah.
I can't.
Snowpiercer, I 100% agree with you. But these two films
Well,
are just,
Snowpiercer is also an American film in a
yeah,
sense, and so
Oh, stars, Chris Evans and
yeah, it's
Tilda
definitely
Swinton. Yeah.
harder, but I definitely see parallels in Parasite for sure. What I was trying to say is this is one of his first major motion pictures beyond just like short stories and writing credits. This is his first kind of all encapsulated creative control project. It was made in 2006, so that was 14 years ago, 15 years ago at this point. And
Hmm.
so that's also another kind of way that we have to look at it is in the context of the era of movies it came out in. And I think it really fits in that era of the 2006 monster movies that were really popular at that time. I
In the
wish I,
West, you're saying?
yeah, in the West especially.
Got
And
it.
so,
Okay.
and also Korean monster movies are in their own category. They're not something like we tend to blend monster movies and horror movies together, whereas then I think in Korea they very much separate those two genres, which I think is what lended to this movie being tonally different than what we expected because it's not a horror movie. It's not. I can't call it a horror movie at all. It's a it's a monster movie, and in that you're gonna have a little bit of humor. You're gonna have a little bit of strange character motivations because like you're kind of surrounding these real characters around a very fictional situation. So I think that there's definitely a grain of salt to take it with there. Now, like I said, I'm not defending that. I'm just wanting to bring up the point that there are parts of the movie that I feel are lost on me as a Western viewer that
yeah,
would make total sense if you were from South Korea. And this is a Korean movie.
Yeah.
And so that definitely attributes to the way that and we are absorbing it as a group.
yeah, definitely. There's a lot of like contextual things that if I were more in tune with the culture, then possibly would make much more sense.
I
Yeah.
will say, I do love the human relations from
Yeah.
this director. Like what Jesse was saying earlier, the dynamic between the family members, certain family members, is very interesting. It feels very real and authentic a lot of the times. And unfortunately, when I watched this movie the second time, it almost seems like the monster aspect and the virus and the it not being real and you know I just didn't even pay attention to any of it at one point. It's like to go into a different movie just real quick. When I watch Interstellar, I watch it as like a father and daughter just drama story, if that makes sense. Just
Yeah.
because what I'm drawn to because I feel like that's what the director did the best and what he's actually very good at. Um yeah, another really quick thing. You guys will find out pretty quickly that Roland Emmerich is a patron saint of Jesse
Yeah,
and
it's my
his
Man.
favorite
films.
filmmaker, of course. I
And
love Independence Day. It's a
the
masterwork.
CGI for this film was done by a company called The Orphanage, which also did the visual effects for The Day After Tomorrow.
Another glorious masterpiece.
Yeah. Interesting.
For anyone listening, that's all sarcasm.
Yeah, Roland Emmerich is terrible.
So I'm sorry if that touches a nerve of some people who like Independence Day. I also am in the camp of Independence Day being a fucking sloppy Joe that has fallen on the cafeteria floor.
I
Um,
love it.
Yeah, I don't
I
know.
love
It's
it.
weird. It's weird. Like because I know that I'm being a nitpicky asshole about this movie, and it's hard to say exactly why. Because sometimes I watch movies and like I completely forgive plotting, and
Mm.
it's hard to say exactly why that is. But like I like a lot of movies that would probably qualify as like a mess of like scenes. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough to sort of explicate that better at this moment. But
I think
yeah, I don't know. Sometimes the logic like really bothers me, and sometimes it doesn't. For this one, it did.
I think it's
Okay.
because our exposure to so far of Korean films, sorry to interrupt, Alex, is just that
No,
it's a
no, you're good.
level of we've seen such a high level of filmmaking so far in our very short exposure to this cultural genre and cultural filmmaking style, and it's all kind of been hitters. The Wailing
Yeah.
hitter, Parasite hitter,
Train to
Train to
Busan,
Busan
hitter.
hitter.
Yep.
It's like so it's kind of almost disappointing to see a Korean, especially one that's so high. I mean, this movie has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes.
People fucking love this movie.
People
Oh,
love
yes.
this movie, and so I kind of,
Critics love this
yeah,
movie.
it's a very widely regarded movie. That's why I chose it, because I was like, okay, well, I want to talk about two great Korean films in the first episode, and I kind of did a little homework, and I was like, oh wow, I mean, Toast top grossing, just a huge, widely popular. It's a cultural phenomenon in South Korea. So definitely, let's talk about it. And I think it's a little disappointing to for it to be as messy as it is, but I think that that's kind of talking back to my point of this is a amusement park ride, and I know I use this metaphor a lot, of a movie. It's entertaining and hard stop there. With and anything more than that is just icing on the cake. Like I'm like the funeral scene. I had two more scenes I wanted to mention real quick that I thought were really really great. You have the funeral scene. You have the scene with Juan Seo's ghost when they are in the snack shack eating together, and her
Mhm.
ghost appears and they start feeding her. I
Dude,
can't.
okay, did I see a different cut of the movie? Because I read that. I read some notes and I was like, Ghost, what the hell? And then I went back and looked at the scene again and I still didn't see it.
So it's a very small scene. It's right when they first get to back to the snack shack after escaping, and they're all sitting around the table, and they're just eating, like, kind of pigging out on junk food, and Hwanseo kind of appears in her school outfit. She kind of just fades in out of the darkness. She doesn't appear like a ghost. She looks like herself, and she does not materialize like a ghost. She more just kind of comes in from the background and fades from the darkness into the main character's table, and they all kind of start feeding her. So it's hard to put my finger on exactly why that scene was so good, but it was almost like this girl was the linchpin that was holding this family together. She was the future. She was smart, funny, and she was the reason they all stayed together as a family. And she's the reason they all fight together as a family. And so when she appears in this scene, it's immediately like this almost uninterrupted flow to start taking care of her.
I'm
They all,
pulling this up. I'm watching this scene again right now to see if I can see this because I watched it twice and I didn't see it.
yeah, it's so there's that, and I'll give I'll keep talking for the sake of not having dead air, but it's just an impactful scene, no dialogue, and it's right before the big exposition dump by the dad about the main character's arrested development and his inability to move forward in his life. So I kind of feel like it also kind of plays into that scene a little bit of this central figure. And I don't know, Alex, if you have something different while Jesse's looking that up.
No, that I think that fits in perfectly with this idea, this juvenile thing that I'm going with, and this idea that, the monster brings it out in them. But in everyday life, the daughter is she is the hope, she is the light, she is the all of that potential energy that they once had, you know, is all now stored into her.
She wasn't in it. It's not in. It's not in here.
So, but is it? I mean, I don't know. Like, that was a good scene. It was quick and it had a nice impact. And I'm sorry you didn't see it because it definitely was one of the better scenes.
That feels like it would have added something to the end of the film, indeed.
And then the last scene that I just want to quickly point out is the sewer scene. Now there's many sewer scenes with Hung Seo, and especially when the young boy gets added to the mix, which was a little ham-fisted, I will admit. Kind of introducing his character. Also, shit, I don't have it written down, but Alex, if you know the name of that Korean philosophy of like taking what you can to survive, that's mentioned a couple times, and I did not write that down.
Oh,
It's
I
just,
do not know that.
yeah, there was
I do not.
the young boy when he's first introduced with his older brother. They rob the snack shack, and the little boy wants to take money. And he says, "Don't take money. That's theft." And he's like, "Well, we're stealing all their food." And he's like, "It's called like serio or something." And I'm so apologize to any person listening, maybe Korean, and like
Yeah, we're from California.
I'm just destroying a very known concept, but I want to look it up. But it's this idea of that if you are stealing to survive, it's not stealing, and
Ah,
so that theme is brought up with the young boy when he's first introduced and his older brother. And then it's brought up again when the father does the exposition dump because he says that when um oh shit, I'm so sorry. When Gangdu's was growing up, they were really, really poor. They had nothing, no food. They were starving. And he says like the lack of protein in his diet was why he kind of wasn't able to develop like everyone else. Like they were already he had already made money in his snack shack by the time his other two children were born to feed them proper food. Whereas when Gangdo was growing up, all he ate was snacks and junk
exactly.
food. So he's stuck in this juvenile state because of this very reason. That exposition dump, that whole scene with the family back in the snack shack was probably the most important scene in the movie as far as structural character development. But and I got a little off on a little tangent there. The scene I wanted to mention was when the monster comes in and vomits all the bones into the bottom of the sewer, which, as far as just a monster movie, that's just like fun. Like that's just like a
Yeah,
fun thing. It kind of adds a little creepiness to the monster. He just like pukes up like, I mean, what looked like at least like 10 people's worth of skeletons,
yeah,
and so that was pretty cool. But that whole kind of ending segment where she's trying to get out, she makes the tie out of the shirts and puts it around the police baton, and then she gets caught by not the monster actively, but almost like the monster passively in its sleep. Catches her because the tail grabs her and lowers her down, but the monster still sleeps. I don't know if there's any significance to that. I doubt it, but I just thought it was kind of a cool detail about the monster and a little bit about like how she's crafty and smart and she's like trying, she never
yeah.
gives up and stuff like that, kind of reinforcing her as really the hero. And really at the end of this movie, she's the hero. She saves the young boy, she
Oh,
redeems
yes.
her father. I mean, if you notice at the end, the father gets rid of his blonde hair. He has
He's a
matured
father.
into a
He's a
father.
father.
You know,
Yes.
exactly. You know, he's feeding
Thrust
the
upon him
son.
by life.
Yeah,
Yep.
and he gets a really great redemption, which I really liked at the end.
Yeah, if you're going into this movie watching it as a monster movie, right? You're like going in for that experience, you will have fun. I
Yeah,
can't
I think you
knock
guys
it for that.
approached it the better way, as in like not trying to dissect it
I mean,
in the nitty gritty asshole way that I did.
No, I don't
I
think it's
mean,
yeah. Go ahead,
but when
Alex.
talking about his next movie, which with all of the acclaim,
Oh,
with Parasite coming up, the way that we're comparing the two, it's like it's almost impossible to not look at that movie and then look back at this film, which I'm glad we're talking about this one first and really treat it like the same, because he didn't just make a monster movie and try and be like, this is my take on the monster genre. He definitely was trying to do a lot of things and almost a little too much.
yeah, this
Uh,
wasn't Bong Joon-ho's like Sharknado. You know, he
yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
trying to just
exactly.
cash in on the sci-fi monster movie. He was trying to say something, and whether
No, there's craft here, there's
Yeah,
ideas here, there's really good scenes, good character moments. It's not a bad movie by any stretch. It just has some structural problems for me.
It has some
Yeah.
structural problems, period. Like, I'm not in any way denying your points, and also I don't think that you're being an asshole for being
No, I,
for being
I don't think
picky.
so either.
Okay,
I
yeah,
think
because
a
there
I
good
are,
just
way.
that's
yeah,
yeah.
I think that's good. I think that's a good dynamic to have when you're trying to view a movie from three different lenses. Is like you need to be able to look at it in super critically, then kind of take a step back and look at it from a wider point of view as Bong Joon's first major motion picture, and at least not his first major motion, but his first creative control picture. And I think that that's all really important to kind of figuring out what exactly is going on, because I will agree, post the scene with the English speaking doctor, the movie does fall apart. It does. I mean, I just don't. I just can't. I mean, when he bursts out of the trailer and the fucking army's having a barbecue,
Yeah,
I
they're like cooking wieners and hanging up
yeah,
sheep, and
Yeah.
you're like, what?
it's like very like
Yeah.
jarring. Like, what's going on here? And then like the whole like the protest kind of just happens. Like they kind of touch on it a bit when they introduce this Agent Yellow, which I mean was really obviously like a take on Agent Orange and like America's like chemical infection of
Involvement with
yeah.
Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was that, and America was definitely a tertiary antagonist to this movie for sure. So, and then you see this like kind of like bean, this like floating clitoris up in the sky that's like spewing yellow
Mm.
smoke, and at least that's what it looked like to my
You're
juvenile
getting me all
mind.
excited here, Jeff.
And so, the protest against it happens very quickly, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, okay, this is like really a hot button issue for everyone, which makes sense. Like it would be. I mean, they're releasing like a
Oh yeah.
biological agent in public, which makes a lot of sense. But the final fight scene, which I think would be a good, I mean, unless we want to kind of go over anything else, I think the final fight scene kind of has its own kind of section in this conversation
Yeah.
because it is definitely fucking wild.
It is. The movie definitely decides that in that moment that it's gonna get really, really crazy, whether you like it or not. And regardless of everything that's happened before, anything that's been measured out before, that scene is I could imagine it being almost an entirely different crew and cast and like just
Yes.
a whole different group of people just comes in, they're like, we're gonna shoot this one scene now. Um, but walking back just a few moments
Yeah.
to something that Jesse said at the beginning of this conversation about how it feels like the scenes are just playing out. There's this feeling that when you get to that scene with the English speaking doctor, it seems like everyone stopped for the day for filming, right? And they were like, well, we know we didn't film the end. Like, we know we're not done. But what else do we do?
Yeah.
And then from that point on, it was just filler. It was just like, okay, we're gonna get to the end. We're gonna do this. We need to chase this.
Yeah, it
We
was.
need to not chase this. It I don't know. So like I think it's very fair, Jesse's reaction to the film.
I
Agreed.
mean, I could sum it up in one sentence. They invented a homeless man out of nowhere to come fight the monster for them.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, there is that. I think the movie suffers from some editing issues. I think that you could have swapped some scenes around and really created a little more cohesive of a narrative. Like I think they escaped the hospital too early. Once they escaped the hospital and had the guns and were hunting down the monster, I literally
Are those
paused the
guys
movie.
criminals or
Yeah,
gangsters or
yeah,
of some kind?
yeah.
Sorry.
I think they were supposed to be like smugglers or in some because they were very like shisty, and they robbed the dad of his like whole life savings and everything like that, and they were very penny pinching. And so I definitely think that they were like criminals hired. Again, no context, totally a
yeah,
mess. But I
no,
think
they're much like the homeless guy. They're put there to achieve like a narrative device, right? To
yeah,
get people from one place to another to achieve something without an underlying like logic or signposting about it.
yeah. Well, you could have, and that's what I'm trying to say is like you could have easily fixed a lot of these issues by, because when they escaped and they had the guns, I paused the movie to look at the timestamp because I was like, am I almost done with this movie? Because
It's like 10 minutes in.
and it was no, it was about 35, 40 minutes into the movie that they escape and they're on the hunt for the monster. And I'm like, is this movie like a straight like suburban Sasquatch like 80-minute movie? Like I don't understand why they're already out of the hospital. I think they could have gained a lot from staying in the hospital, getting more information about the reaction to this so-called virus, more people that they've been quarantining. Then you have the scene with the English speaking doctor where he reveals, oh, it's all not true. And then since you've been in the hospital this whole time with the character, maybe the family could have escaped, but the main character, instead of getting recaptured, he could have just stayed the whole time. Because you get
A little
this,
bit of focus. A
yeah,
little bit of
because
focus. The
yes,
movie's trying to do a lot of things.
because
Focusing on
Exactly.
some
then
of them would have been to its benefit.
yeah, well then that scene with the English speaking doctor revealing the kind of, which I kind of interpreted as a twist that fell very flat, was it could have been more impactful because okay, he's been in the hospital this whole fucking movie and he's been
Right.
subjected to we could show scene
Yeah.
after scene of him being subjected to testing and invasive, and they did one of those, to be fair. They did like a tissue sampling while he was still conscious, and that was like extremely painful. Like more of those scenes, like subjecting him to like this near torture, and then you have the scientists come in and reveal, and it's like, oh shit, it's like this big conspiracy, or like they're trying.
Lobotomy time.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
he gets the lobotomy, and like, and I think that Alex is correct that they were trying to say not that he's stupid, too stupid for a lobotomy, but more. I'm gonna give two examples. One, I think the example that they were trying to go for is like he's too like invested in saving his daughter for even like a lobotomy to work. Now we
I
don't
don't think it
know,
works that way.
but we don't know it's a lobotomy either. They could have just taken a tissue sample from his brain
With a drill.
with a
Yeah.
drill. Yes, I mean you have to drill into someone's head regardless if you're like, doing brain surgery or
But
anything.
so the problem with this is that they established that there is no virus before they do these things to him.
So I think that that's why the lobotomy makes more sense, because it's like, okay, well, we tell him that there's no virus, and then we lobotomize him so he can't tell anybody about it.
I don't know.
But
It's
I
weird
guess.
though,
it's
because
weird.
does he start to uncover that there's no virus on their own, or do they just give this man information that then will have to lead to them killing him
Well, yeah, I mean,
or lobotomizing
Yeah.
him? Excuse me. Like,
because they didn't
Exactly,
realize that
Alex.
he spoke a little bit of English, and that's
okay, that makes
that's the thing,
sense. He
because
like
he's
picked up
telling.
on the conversation.
Yes, he picks it up through
Ah,
eavesdropping because he's turning and
that's what
talking to the
happened.
interpreter. He's telling the interpreter, I'm going to tell you something that not many people know, not even the highest up people, that there is no virus. And then the Gang Du leans over and he goes, like he says in very broken English, like, no virus. There's no
That's
virus.
a fair point.
And
I
so
still think it's a mess, but that's a fair point.
it's like assuming that he's stupid. And so that's the
Okay.
thing, is they've assumed to that point that this guy's an idiot. He's a moronic child. And instead he speaks a second language. But they didn't set it up, and so it has no emotional or structural impact on the story.
Yeah,
And
that
this
was
is where
rather weak. Yeah.
and this is where we get to, and this is why the movie breaks down at this point. And then we lead into probably the kookiest final fight of almost any movie I've seen other than Riccio.
Yeah, I mean the ending is wonderful. I mean it's like it's dumb and ridiculous and like very Hollywood in a
Yeah,
sense, but it's like I don't know, it's fun. It's fun
that's
monster
where
movie stuff.
that's where he almost was like, you know what, fuck all this other shit that I'm trying to say. Let's just. He's like, it is a fun monster movie from the get go. Let's just finish with that. Like, let's just finish with having fun. You
Yeah,
know.
it's like Ryan Johnson came in and just like did the last like 5 minutes of the movie and just was like, yeah, all that narrative and shit you're trying to set up, fuck that. And
Yeah.
like, and then just like they had a monster fight and they're releasing chemicals on the public and people are bleeding out of their eyes and their ears.
As a closing statement on the film, for me at least, as like an overall broad thematic look, I think it's cool to look at the idea of, the formaldehyde in the river, years of US, European, um, we don't have to call it aggression. This isn't like a political podcast, whatever you want to call it, their presence, um, kind of stifled the development of some of these countries, right? If we're going to stretch that argument. And this idea that the main character eats these preservative, like very high preservative synthetic foods, um, this idea that like he himself is also arrested. And so when this monster comes out, the entire reaction from everyone is so muddled and so strange almost because there are no heroes in monster movies in Korea in the same way that there are in the West. And it shows that with like this decisive action from the American uh that guy who like is in the South Korea with his girlfriend at the time,
Yeah.
right? It's like this idea that like Western molded identities make these very quick and very like fast decisions, and react to things in a certain way. And the way that it plays upon the US Asian relations, which you talked about earlier, I think is like probably the coolest message of the movie, other than it being a fun monster movie. I think I agree with Jesse that everything else falls kind of short. One thing I wanted to ask you guys, I didn't know if this would be like a cool exercise or not, but based on like the rating on like Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, do you guys think that you would put the movie at where it's rated or above or below it?
Oh,
I mean,
definitely below.
yeah, I
Okay.
looked, I scanned the reviews, and it would have been below the lowest one.
Oh, okay.
Um, but I still think, like, I think you'll have a good time watching it. I think the vast majority of people are not gonna like break it apart the way that I did. Um, and I think that's the right way to approach it. If you just approach it as like a fun action movie with good scenes and nice character moments, then you're gonna have a good time. It's well made in that respect. It's well made in like in the small ways. It's just trying to glue all those together didn't quite fit. It became clunky.
Hmm.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, I would probably rate it a little lower. I definitely rate it lower than what it was given. From a personal standpoint, I definitely think it's bloated. I definitely think it's got structural issues. It's got leaps of logic and very poor expository dialogue. But on a whole, I'd still recommend it to somebody if they want just something fun to watch. That's not in the normal wheelhouse of monster movies. Like I will,
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's smarter than like Godzilla versus Kong or
for
something.
sure.
You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
infinitely smarter than that nonsense.
But
So
in those attempts to be smarter, you play a dangerous game sometimes, right?
what
You do.
I think you're kind of just touching on the fact that this is Bong Joon's kind of like feeling out his format. He's really kind of playing around with these themes and these styles that then will translate
That's what I was getting
phenomenally
to. Yeah,
well
with
in
yeah.
Parasite, which
The cool thing about this movie is you see it growing. You see a growing director, right? And it's like an infantile, not infantile, that's almost too harsh of a word, but it's cool to see the trajectory of a director. And not every single one is going to hit, the very first time. And seeing the way that this guy has started to make films is like when you go back to this movie, it's cool to see the little, precursors of like, oh, I see where you were trying to do this before.
yeah.
Yeah, social commentary, character interactions, and so forth.
Well, I think and just to wrap it up, I think there was a little hesitation on his part to go too far into social commentary and still make it a fun monster movie. I think it was just a hard medium for him to play with doing something he feels is in his wheelhouse of style, but at the same time trying to create a message and a story. Whereas in Parasite, which we'll talk about, you see that as the main focus point is let me talk to you about something that is wrong in South Korea. And
Yeah,
I think that that's definitely a really inspiring thing to see, and why he's been able to have so much commercial success is that he's been given the ability to make something fun and cool to watch and interesting and entertaining and still play out his style in his own way, because they're two different movies stylistically, but very much sharing the same types of themes, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
See him grow into a phenomenal director, just like Roland Emmerich.
Yep. Oh my god.
And on that note, are we done? I think we're done talking about the host.
Yeah, we've definitely spent
Yeah.
a good amount of time. We spent almost the runtime of the movie talking about the movie.
Has it
So
been? Is it almost 2 hours now?
no, we're at 1:15, but it's definitely,
1:15.
yeah, it's definitely
Okay.
a good amount of
Well,
time. So we'll take a
we'll
quick
wrap
break.
up. Yeah, we'll wrap up this episode in a minute here, and the next episode, which we're just going to take a break and then jump into Parasite. But
I'm
as
excited.
just a little as a little like ending thing, is there anything you guys watched this week that you found interesting? Maybe you'd recommend to people, or something to stay away from?
Oh,
Is there anything you
Ooh.
want to talk about?
you know, no, I mean, like I said before, I've been rewatching Dragon Ball Z again, and that show is an
Ah,
absolute clown fiesta, but super just, it's got a lot of nostalgia, and it's fun to watch an old,
of course.
it's fun to
Yeah,
watch to see a hand-drawn anime again. It's just something you don't see much anymore. So that's pretty much been my digestion of material over this past week. Alex, you have anything?
I do. I want to save my recommendation, I think, for the end of the
This
next
is the
episode.
end. Oh, the next one.
Yeah,
Okay,
Of the next episode, but I will give
sure.
something to please avoid.
yes,
Um,
please.
and it is the name is escaping me right now because it's just such a terrible film. It's a Netflix film that came out recently, which obviously, if people are listening and they're fans of movies, you know that there's a trend of, these streaming services building their own studios. They have lots of capital. They can get big names. They can get even directors, good cinematography. But my God, do they just skimp on the writing, it
Yeah.
seems, on a lot of the films. Some are good,
Shadow and
but
Bone.
no. This is
Well, maybe if you remember the
Yeah,
name, we
you can
can
tell
bring
us
it up
next
next
time.
episode.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now I'm interested. All
Uh,
right. Well,
I would really
I
recommend the
care a lot.
Philadelphia story. I care a lot. Okay, I've heard of that.
Avoid it.
Avoid it.
avoid
Yeah.
it.
Okay, you've heard it from Alex, folks. Avoid I care a lot. Do not allow yourself to care about this movie. I
Oh,
personally would recommend the Philadelphia story from 1940. I've been watching a lot of old movies. It's from George Cukor, and it's got Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, Jimmy Stewart. Good old Jimmy Stewart. And it's just hilarious. The dialogue is snappy and wonderful. It's like pretty light and breezy. It's kind of just about like it's basically a romantic comedy, but in an era where romantic comedies weren't the bottom of the barrel. And you had like really high class people doing them.
You said
And
1940?
1940,
Oh wow, so like peak Stewart.
Big Stewart.
Okay.
And yeah, it's great. So we're gonna go ahead and take a break. We'll end this episode here. Thanks for listening, and yeah, it was fun talking about the host.
yeah,
It
awesome.
was.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cool.
See you
We'll
soon.
see you in the next one.
All right, later.